So I hope to not be the only person who's talking for the duration. So our topic today is the training around big system implementations. And just to define that, I work presently for an organization, and I'm not going to go into names tonight. If you want to see my resume, as it were, you can always find me on LinkedIn, and my employment history is listed there. So I've worked for a handful of companies that are called third-party integrators, and if there's a large company out there that would like to replace any of its existing information technology with systems such as SAP or Oracle or other enterprise resource planning softwares like that, they bring in the third-party integrator, which has expertise in that area, to gather requirements, customize and configure the application, install it, and ensure that the organization is prepared to operate that technology successfully. So my end of it is I work in a group that's typically called organizational change, and I don't have anything to do with configuration or programming or any of that stuff. My job is to understand how the new work environment is going to impact individuals and what do we need to do to ensure that those individuals are competent and confident about their competence on day one when the new system goes live. So previous to that, as Greg said, I've done a bunch of other things, and really my white-collar career kind of started when I worked in a bank, and I was attached to the IT department, and I was what we used to call in those days a systems trainer or an end-user trainer, where as an internal employee, I went around, and as we upgraded new systems to newer versions with changes, or if we swapped out one system for another, I would make sure the end users, again, were competent and confident to operate in the new system in online. So I have a couple of, really two sets of, I'm going to call them parameters to discuss today. And the first one, which you see before you, is called the types of training delivery. And I just want to run through this list because when you're selecting how you're going to prepare end users to operate in a new environment, these are pretty much your sets of options. And if anyone has any questions on any of these, let me know, and I'll do my best to define them. I'm just going to run through them quickly just so we have this batch of parameters in front of us. So from a delivery standpoint, we have options of either synchronous or asynchronous delivery. In terms of instructor-led training, and I've kind of listed these from the least invasive to the most invasive, meaning effort and cost associated. So a person can stand in front of a room or be recorded standing somewhere and just lecture one way out of the population. Or we can add some demonstration into that. Or after the demonstration, we can put some practice in place. We can build simulation where we're doing our best to replicate the future work environment. Number 5 is a work session. And what I mean by that, and later I'll say that work sessions typically apply to small target audiences, is there are oftentimes efforts within a project where the current process has to be understood, the future process, work process has to be documented, the requirements around that so that the system can be configured and programmed are documented, the new system is built, and then it's tested. And people have to test the system to make sure it's going to behave as it is desired. But involving a small population of end users in those design and testing work sessions is oftentimes the best way to get a small population trained, because they're doing the work of the system development testing. By the time they get done testing it, they don't need any training because they've already just used the system. And finally, there's one-on-one coaching, where somebody who knows what they're doing sits with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and gets them through example and demonstration and practice feedback up to a level of proficiency. That's the most invasive, and unless you have unique individuals with special needs, other characteristics, you want to stay away from this because it's prohibitively labor. I hope you're all familiar with the various levels of e-learning, where there's passive reception of information or page turning, limited interaction, moderate interaction, and then simulations of games. And then finally, we have written documentation that can be put in place either to augment or in lieu of actual training activity. And Patrick, I see a question. I'll get there in a second. We can write policy. We can write procedure. We can write end-user documentation. And the difference being that policy is of a higher order, describing basic intents and goals. Procedures are basic steps that are taken in order to execute a task or a work process, and the end-user documentation gets down to the level of keystroke. We can produce job aids, which may or may not be available online, and we can produce online help, which is available, should be available at the time of need and at the point of need in the system. So Patrick wants to know what weighs heavier on deciding synchronous versus asynchronous, the audience for the content. How would I decide that? If the audience cannot be gathered together at the same time, without causing some kind of a nightmare, I would consider asynchronous. I've put a bunch of asynchronous out there because I had audiences in different time zones and or in different languages, or sometimes the audience is too big to get them all together. And if we were to consider breaking it down into different sessions, still had challenges making that happen. Oftentimes you deal with a population where an entire population in a location cannot be taken off the floor or out of a workplace to attend training because the department gets shut down. That's another thing to think about. As far as the content is concerned, you give that a secondary weighting, and really only when you feel there's a need for a live person to be available to answer questions, because you think there'll be a meaningful frequency of questions coming out, would I then strongly urge for a synchronous presentation. And as far as blended approach, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about this scale of training, oftentimes you're talking about thousands of learners and dozens upon dozens of topics. So when you break out the learner versus topic combination, you again may have dozens and dozens of those. So when you look at that entire curriculum across that entire learner spectrum, you're very well likely to wind up with some type of a blended approach. And it may very well be, here's some pre-work, go read this stuff, and then show up for a synchronous event, which may be in a classroom or it may be virtual. And then go read some more stuff, maybe go do some exercise. And We've also done some things in the past where we've put up a project website that's internal, and we've dedicated space in user training there, where individuals, as they're out there exposing themselves to training materials, can post up questions. And we'll have various subject matter experts who will check the board out periodically and post answers back out to the question. If we get some volume related to any particular topic, we may go back into the learning materials and see if perhaps they need to be altered. So hopefully I've covered off those two questions there from Patrick and from Larry. You're welcome. And so that's the scope of the training. So I'll ask Greg now to move on to page number 2. And you'll notice that this presentation was developed using Microsoft Word, and that's because I hate PowerPoint. I think it's evil, and it's slowly destroying America. Layla, thank you. I've seen things happen with PowerPoint that make me want to leave the room, but I'm a professional, so I can't do that. So let's talk about the conditions or parameters that need to be identified. For e-learning, one, I don't do that anymore. People who work for me do that. I couldn't author an e-learning course if somebody put a gun to my head. My current organization and the last one I worked for used a tool called UPerform, which allows you to develop e-learning courseware at various levels, which then simultaneously can be reproduced as procedures in end-user documents. So I know there are other tools out there. I'm not aware of all of them, but the nature of that tool, one, it's specifically geared to work with the SAP application, and it's very effective. And I've seen it used effectively in organizations. Walter says not only SAP. And that's quite possible. I've kind of been SAP focused for my last 3 employers, which has been about 3, 4, 6 or 7 years. I've only been exposed to SAP. And if UPerform works with other Windows-based apps, that's great for UPerform. So a couple of things that, as you're putting together what I will call your recommendation for how to solve the problem of producing a competent and confident end user population prior to go live is, and again, this is all with respect to the combination of learner and topic. Because it's not hard to count the number of employees in an organization, but figuring out how many employees need to be trained in any particular topic that's being developed, that can be a challenge. Oftentimes, you need to go hang out with the folks who are setting up the data security within the user IDs, understand who's getting assigned to which transactions in the system. Because oftentimes, that's the basis of the training topic, will be the transactions or the tran codes or the key codes that represent specific system functionality. So your number of learners by topic is important. Where these learners are located is important. And conversion versus new hire is when we're talking about going into an organization and changing out their computer systems, we're taking people who already know how to do their job, and we're going to train them how to do that job differently with this new computer system. What we're not really training is people who have never done the job, how to do the job, and how to do the job with this computer system. So from an entering behavior standpoint, we're dealing with a higher level, and we have a much richer context. Now, it's a great conversation to have with the client to say, look, we're going to get your existing population up to speed, and they're going to be good to go on day one. But beginning on day two, people in your organization are going to transfer or leave the organization. How are you going to train new hires who don't have any of the underlying skill sets based on the general job proficiency? And oftentimes that's an opportunity to talk about building training that's geared towards novice audiences as opposed to experienced audiences, which can become perhaps follow-on work after you solve the main problem of just getting the new systems blocked out. Then we have the topic of frequency of performance. If you're talking about a transaction that's used once a year, something like anything related to performance management or annual compensation or benefits enrollment or end-of-year processing, and you're not at that time of year when that activity is going to be performed shortly after go-live, as you all know, training is a complete waste of time. So, when you run into those situations, you want to focus on documentation that hopefully will be maintained and will be in place so that when those events do come around on the calendar, there'll be some material ready to go. Next is the immediacy of performance post-go-live, and that's a little different than frequency. For some transactions and for some users, but I'll use the same word, the frequency of performance or the immediacy. It may not be within 1 day, 2 days, 5 days after go live that every single user who would be trained in a transaction is going to perform that transaction. An example of that could be processing an expense report. Because not everyone who travels in an organization is going to travel the week after go live and have to process an expense report. So again, what I'll say here is when a transaction or a skill is going to be applied very soon after go live, then some type of a training event may be warranted. If, however, the new skill is not going to be called into use for more than 2 weeks after go live, don't waste the learner's time by putting them through a training event so that they can forget what they've learned, because they're not going to use it for weeks. And so that's frequency and immediacy. Next we have complexity and learning hierarchy. And I'm hoping that somewhere in your studies you've talked about learning hierarchies where a new skill is analyzed in terms of what's the actual behavior or competency that's required to execute the desired performance, and are there underlying skills, knowledge that are necessary in order to be proficient in the task. If all we're really doing for employees or learners is the new system is kind of like the old system, but we're going to change some of the labels that things are called, that's very low complexity, and that may be handled with less invasive training methods. If, however, we're going to completely blow away everything that somebody knows about their job, and we're going to radically alter the underlying conceptual understanding of what they have today, that's a high complexity and a high impact, in which case the approach more likely is going to need to be in a live or synchronous environment so that there can be a lot of dialogue back and forth, and the instructor can be proactive to ensure that this underlying complex information is absorbed before moving on to the more process-specific activities involved. And Tracy says, in the case of someone who is to perform a task at a later date, should they be tested right before the task takes place? That would be marvelous. Logistically, it's probably a nightmare because I don't know how you would keep track of that. I don't know how you could tell me today when is every single person going to next need to perform this task, and somehow keep track of that, and then somehow push out a learning event to that individual based on that.
So can I ask you a question?
Of course you can. I'm excited about my first question tonight.
Well, this is all new to me, so it's a little confusing. But in the example that you used with the expenses,
yep,
and you said it would not be helpful to test that person right away if they're not going to do it until a later date. Then what would you do in that case? I would think that if they're tested, at least maybe it does stay with them, but you said they would forget. So how do you handle that?
Well, here's how I handle it. I make sure that we've produced an exhaustive set of documentation and that it's available with online help somehow, so that 3 months from now, when that person goes to fill out an expense report, they can click on the help button and they've got a good document to help them get through that. That's what I would suggest. So other than that, I really don't want to train somebody today for something they're going to do in 3 months. It's just wasting it. And Walter says to schedule a retraining around the time to perform. And yes, and again, for some things you can do that. For things like benefits enrollment, or things like annual performance appraisal, absolutely, because you know who they are and you know when it's going to happen. But these under random things like expense reports, that can happen at any point in time for whoever's allowed to travel. So, you know, that's why I think that the most important thing you can do is build a robust health system and maintain that forever. So, and if you've built an online, an e-learning curriculum, and you maintain that going forward, then that's available for someone to go find it and take the course before they're going to try to do something that was put in place months ago. So thank you for the suggestion, Larry. Next, we have quantity of performance. And this is kind of the thing that I haven't really seen out there in the world. I try to understand it. If you look at an individual and we were to ask that person, what do you do to do your job? And they tell you, well, I do activity A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And you say, okay, how much time do you spend on each of those? And they tell you. So, and maybe to do one of each of those activities over the course of the week, let's say that was 20 hours worth of effort to do everything in their scope of work. What I'd like to understand is, as far as what we're going to train them, are we going to be training them on all 20 of those hours, or does this system and its attached changes only affect 2 hours of the work that they do? So if it's only a small portion of what somebody does, I might reduce the invasiveness of the training effort we put against it, as opposed to if we're going to be training a person on most of what they do for their job. And I can't really come up with anything more scientific or defined about that, but it's just a thing that I like to know, is, are we impacting this person's entire work existence or just a tiny sliver of it, or maybe somewhere in between? And just use that as a consideration. And frequently you'll see when topics are analyzed against audiences, a parameter that's built into that is importance of criticality. And I try to avoid that. was, I don't care what you're doing at your job. If it's completely unimportant and non-critical, you shouldn't be doing it. But if you do have to do it, you have to do it. So everything else should be considered around whether or what type of training should be applied. I've never found importance or criticality as another parameter to look at various tasks to be a meaningful thing for me as far as decision making around what type of training to throw at a particular topic and audience. So in terms of general notes, and these are things to think about, and then I'm basically going to wrap up my formal part of this, and then we're going to attack the questions that you've. So I'll repeat myself again, that your goal here is to have a user population, an end user population that is not only competent at performing their work in the new environment, but they believe, or even better yet, they know that they are competent, and that drives confidence. I have seen, I've witnessed, for example, in a bank, we've trained the tellers in the branch system how to use the new system. And on day one, I'm in the branch, and we're observing the performance on the new system. And I've seen the tellers, because they're nervous, forget how to count money and make mistakes because they're nervous, because they're not confident. So all of this drives me to a brief lecture on level 2 evaluation, which is the evaluation at the end of the learning event where you determine whether or not the learning objectives have been achieved. And the correct type of a level 2 evaluation is one where the learners are asked to perform tasks that simulate as closely as possible the actual work environment to which they will be subject, which means multiple choice tests, true false tests, fill in the blank tests are out, because that has nothing to do with the work environment. Nobody's job requires them to answer multiple choice tests, or true false tests, or fill in the blank questions. Everyone's job requires them to have some type of an input or materials or information, and to execute a task and to produce some type of a result that is either correct or not correct. And that's what the level 2 evaluation should be. And if the level 2 evaluation is proper, and if I've taken a course and I've succeeded with my level 2 evaluation, I know that I'm competent, and I will therefore be confident. And that's why the next statement there is an ancient statement. And this will come back to an answer to a question later, but the correct structure for a learning objective, and I know that you all know this, otherwise send me your name, but a learning objective includes the performance that's required, the conditions within which the performance takes place, and the criteria by which the results of the performance are evaluated. And if you do not know this about the topic for which you are developing training and the associated evaluation, as far as I'm concerned, you should not be doing the work. And I'll just wait a second to see if anybody wants to argue this field it out. Good.
Yes, sir. I totally agree with what you're saying.
Thank you. That is a correct statement.
Understood.
I can't tell you how many times I have asked someone who's developing, in particular, an e-learning course, what are the learning objectives you are meeting by developing this course? And I do not get a good answer. And it's very sad. So there are people in the world who develop proficiency with e-learning authoring tools, and they think they're a training developer. In my mind, that's the same person who's proficient in operating Microsoft Word, and they think they're an author. Well, you're not. Just because you can use the tool doesn't mean you should use the tool, because it's just a tool. And to reiterate my particular personal proclivity for proper learning objectives, I've stated here, never, ever, ever utter the word understand. And I have had many long, drawn-out conversations with clients in particular when they try to tell me that I need to develop training so that the end users understand how to do their job. I'm much better now at not appearing angry, and I'm better now at using polite language when I have these conversations with people. So, but after 20 years, I'm pretty good at having this conversation and getting the word understand off the table and getting folks to start appreciating what's proper as far as designing training. And the last note here I have is the mathematical equation. And when I left off, just to keep it unclear, is the percent sign. So a lot of you ask questions about whether or not the training is successful, and how do you know if an implementation all right, let me just stop here for a second because I see author me playing define list and so on to stand across the board, and she was angry that I used those verbs. Well, I'm sorry that you were working with an idiot who did not respect your professional skill set. My guess is this person would not go to a dentist and replace the dentist's tools with her own tools. So you are a professional. You have professional standards, and you have professional language, and you have professional practices. And I understand you can't win every battle, but this is the fight that we have to fight every single day and do what we can to win it. One of the ways I've gotten around this is I'll engage in the dialogue on how would you like to evaluate whether or not an individual has understood the learning. And if we can move into that conversation, then generally things can go in a proper direction. Okay, and Allison, I'm sorry for you as well. There is a book. It's an ancient book that might be helpful for you to read, and it might even be helpful if you can get your client to read it. And it's by Robert Mager, and I'm pretty sure it's what every manager should know about training. It's a lovely little paperback book. It can be read in a couple hours, and it prepares you to have the dialogue with idiots. I'm sorry, with clients, and gives you good language and good approaches on how to have this conversation to get them into the right place. So let me get back to the 90 times 90 equals 81. So there was a time I worked for a company that was an outsourcing provider. And I don't know enough about Common Core to get into a discussion. What I do know enough about it is I'm not going to get into a discussion. And other than I believe Common Core refers to education, not training, and there's a difference. So I worked for a company that was an outsource provider, particularly around human resource. So organizations would hire my company to come in and essentially take over the bulk of their human resource function. They would do payroll, they would do benefits administration, and they would do basic personnel management functions. And the way they did that was we put a system together, typically the Human Capital Management module of SAP, and we would build a portal, and through the web portal, employees could perform self-service activities like adding and removing benefits, changing their marital status, changing their address, and benefit things, and blah, 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 blah. And managers could operate and do manager self-service through the portal, such as facilitate transfers and do performance management and all of that stuff. And third-party outsourcing providers are subject to what are referred to as SLAs, Service Level Agreement, which means that they have to answer phone calls within so many rings. They have to have the right answer most of the time. They have to turn around requested transactions within a certain time frame and stuff like that. And if they don't live up to the SLAs, they'll frequently pay a financial penalty. And typically when an arrangement like that starts, the provider will have around 90 days to get their act together and get their performance to where they're hitting the service level target. So a conversation I started to have, but I was unable to get it completed, was that I frequently have experienced when I come in as a third-party person into a client organization, we build wonderful training. And if we're training trainers, we train the hell out of them, and they're all very proficient. And the training is great, and the documentation is great, and the online help is great. And what happens is attendance at the training event is not mandatory, so many people don't show up. And we were not allowed to spend the time to develop proper level 2 evaluations, administer them, and track the results. So folks who came to class may have attended the class, but didn't necessarily put good effort into learning what they should have learned, and we were unable to verify whether or not they learned it. So we oftentimes wound up, not through any effort on our part, but on the client's part, that a significant portion of the population was not competent to operate in their work environment on go-live day. And so the help desk that we set up was bombarded, and many people were, by definition, incompetent or ignorant on day one. And my organization suffered for that. Often to the point where 90 days later, we're still trying to clean up this mess and are having difficulty hitting service level targets. So what I wanted to bake into our contract was, if you're going to hold us to a 90-day window to get up to service level, here's your end of it. You have to produce a 90% pass rate on a valid level 2 exam for 90% of the learners that are identified to take courseware. Otherwise, you can't hold us to the 90-day window. We'll take 120 or 180. Because as a consultant, I cannot make your people show up for class. I cannot make your people pay attention in class. I cannot make your people learn. That's not my job, and it's a good thing because I can't do it. I'm not their boss. So I can't fire anybody. I don't scare anybody. So that's the client end of this deal. So, and I've just set this as an arbitrary figure because I've never really gotten into a situation where I was able to convince the client that, look, if you don't have high attendance and if you don't have a high pass rate on a proper evaluation, your people are going to be idiots on Go Live Day, and guess who they're going to blame? They're going to blame me because I always blame the trainer. But unless you do this, you can't blame me. So I've also gotten very good over the years when people want to yell at me of knowing what the attendance rate was and being able to recall, because I ran around like a person with my head on fire, about level 2 evaluation. And I recall when they're trying to yell at me that, look, 12 months ago, 15 months ago, you'll recall the many conversations we had where I talked about attendance, I talked about level 2 evaluations, and I talked about pass rate. And you wouldn't let me do any of that. So I refuse to accept blame for any failure whatsoever, because you can present to me no evidence that my training was substandard. None. You have nothing with which to attack me. And then I stop talking. And then frequently, that's the end of the conversation. And then somebody else in the room will say, well, why don't we just fix the problem? So, I will tell you, the first, I don't know, first couple of times I had this argument with people, I was not good at it, but I got better over time. And now, I almost kind of look forward to it, because I win it all the time now. So, that's the 90-90-81. Okay, so the big wrap-up here is looking at the types of training and looking at the parameters here. When you have, and I'll answer all the train-the-trainer questions. When you have a large audience that, because of the various parameters listed here, it's clear that an instructor-led classroom learning experience is really the only way we're going to get people to where they need to be. And again, it's a large audience, so we're going to have multiple classroom learning events taking place, sometimes simultaneously, or perhaps spread throughout the country, or perhaps spread around the world. Under situations like that, the train-the-trainer approach is valid. However, the reason I call it a crutch is because I've seen in multiple organizations, not just the ones I've worked in, that not knowing anything, consulting companies respond to a request for proposal, and the clients never ask for that approach in particular. They just say, we need some training, and that's about it. But it seems to me the trend is that the consulting companies today just assume that all training needs will be met in some type of a train-the-trainer approach. They estimate the number of courses. They estimate the number of train-the-trainer events they're going to have to perform, and they slap a price tag on it. because that's simple and it's easy. It's not correct, but organizations that issue RFPs frequently don't know what they're doing because that's not what they do for a living. So they accept that. And once they accept it, and once the vendor goes along with that, now the vendors put themselves in a box where the client's expecting a bunch of train-the-trainer events, even when it doesn't make sense. And once those expectations have been built, it's hard to back out of them. And that's why whenever I get a chance to get involved in pre-sales and sales and client presentations during sales, and then proposal writing, and then statement of work writing, I do that. Because I go in and talk about all of this stuff that we've just gone through here. And the first reaction is client's completely confused. The second reaction is they kind of get a sense I know what I'm talking about. So that when they see a little more complex presentation in the proposal and then in the statement of work, they're okay with that because they've been set up to hear it. And then when the project starts, and I talk to more people, and I can refer to the language in the proposal and the language in the statement of work, I don't have to undo any preconceived expectations because I got to build the expectations from day one, which just makes things so much more easy. So that's kind of the overarching summary. And, wow, look at that. That was a better part of an hour. I didn't think it was going to go that long. So let me start by just asking anybody to ask any questions that they like. And when we exhaust that, I will pick on each of the individuals who has sent in questions and pull out one or two and react to those. So who is the next brave soul who has the guts to ask me a question?
I think everybody's scared, Mick.
Okay. Who has...
I have a question. I'm just not quite sure how I want to phrase it.
Okay.
So when you were talking about your 90-90-81, and you're having this conversation with your client in which the learning didn't transfer because they didn't do what they needed to do. Like I said, I'm having a hard time kind of phrasing the question. What do you do on the front end to try to make sure that that doesn't happen?
As soon as it's possible, and like I said earlier, if I can do this during pre-sales and sales, I'll do this. Oftentimes, I've been assigned to work on a project starting on day one, or quite frequently, I get thrown into a project when it's halfway through because now it's on fire, and they drop me in. So the conversation kind of goes like this. They say, look, here's what I'd like to see, and I guess this is what you would like to see. Both of us would like to know for a fact that before we go live, the people who have to operate this new system know what they're doing and that they feel themselves that they know what they're doing. Agree or disagree? And I get agreement on that. Say, okay. The best way to do that, based on my experience, is to do the same thing that you would do before you sent your son or daughter out to get their driver's license. Because I know that before you let your son or daughter drive a car, you would like to know that they're not going to kill themselves. Right? Right. Well, there's only one real way to do that. And that's to not only tell them what good driving is, but they need to practice that. And they need to practice that in a safe environment that simulates real driving conditions. And they need to demonstrate successfully all of the skills that are necessary to be a safe driver under as many simulated driving conditions as possible, so that you can observe that they have achieved a sufficient degree of proficiency. And you would want that to happen before you let your kid get behind the wheel, right? And nobody can argue with that. You say, well, that's what I'm saying here, is we don't want anybody to show up on day one and not know what they're doing. And we don't want anybody to show up on day one maybe knowing what they're doing but being scared to death. So the best thing we can do for them is to put simulation of work exercises in front of them in the classroom where it's safe to make mistakes and learn, provide them feedback, and really not let them out of the classroom until they can demonstrate proficiency. And in all of that conversation, I've never used the words Kirkpatrick or level or even evaluation. So I try to stay away from my secret learning vocabulary and use the language of my client and try to use an analogy that they can't argue with. So that's kind of how I have that conversation. Does that help?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. And, you know, you can always practice that because from what I can tell, most of you have experience with idiot clients. So any of you could connect with anybody else in the classroom and say, I'd like to role play this. Would you play the part of the idiot client, please? And I think you can get that done. So, are there any other random questions?
Okay. Mr. Magill,
well,
Mr. Magill,
yeah.
I have a question on the 90-90 thing again. How come there were so few attendees? Because every time I've had to go to training of any kind, you sign in, and folks who don't sign in and do the job and get it learned are put on the naughty list, and that's what I'm trying to figure out why that happened.
Because you've worked in organizations that have naughty lists for people who don't attend training.
Something like that, if you know what I mean. It's just you're supposed to do what you're told to do, and that's how it is. If there's a new procedure or something coming out, you need to be able to do your job, and that's it. So it doesn't make sense to me that would be such a low number. That's my question.
All right. Has your professional experience been mostly in government agencies or for-profit organizations, or what type of company?
Government, and I'm in education.
Okay. Well, that's government for you, okay?
Okay.
Government does a much better administrative job of mandating participation in events.
Okay, that's where I'm coming from. So
yeah,
that explains it then. Yeah.
For-profit companies is where I had the bulk of my experience. And I've just seen it firsthand. You get the big list of who should go, and we run the attendance, and we got half of them. I used to accept an industry standard where everybody knew that the initial round of training attendance would be poor. So, of course, the obvious solution to that is, well, let's move up the training. We'll have it earlier, which will leave us time at the end to do makeup classes. And And I got to the point where I said, wait a minute. If everyone knows there are going to be makeup classes, nobody's going to go to the first round. And you put the first round so far up in front of go live that whoever attends the first round is going to forget everything. So from a goal standpoint, what I communicate now to clients is the best time for you to do training would be the day before go live. That's when you should do everyone should be trained the last day. Everyone. Yeah, that's impossible. Understood. But it's a goal, not an objective. So let's not design the training schedule anticipating massive failure. Let's design the training schedule to make the training as effective as possible. Meaning, I'm not going to bake in a whole 2 weeks at the end of it for makeups. We're going to schedule a training based on who needs what training and how many people there are, and we're going to build the logistics so that the training is performed as late as possible. Everybody's going to have sufficient notice. So if you miss the class, that's your problem, not my problem. But I'm not going to train 15 people 2 months out so that I can train 5 people a week out. That's just stupid. So if we need to have 10 deliveries of this class, and we can only have 1 instructor because that's the rules, fine. And it's a half-day class, fine. Then starting 5 days out, we're going to deliver it twice a day. And nobody should forget anything because they'll only have, at a maximum, a week to sit on their knowledge. So that's how I try to build my schedule. Okay. So I'm going to start with Tracy Rogers. Tracy, can you hear me?
Oops, sorry, I couldn't get you off mute. I can.
That's okay. Of the 5 questions that you've posted here, which one is the most important that I have not touched on so far this evening?
Let me see.
So now the rest of you hear the pattern, and you can go examine your own question sets.
You've answered a lot of them. Do you see my 4th question, which is what are the top 3 or the top biggest changes you've observed in system implementation within the past 2 decades? Does that make sense?
Yep. That's
Okay.
the one I made the most notes against.
Okay.
So I'm glad you picked that. So in 20 years, here's what I've seen. E-learning is being used much more than it used to be. And frequently in a positive way. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a lazy person's way out. I have seen, and my note here says a decrease in performance support. And in terms of just pure quantity of performance support, meaning online help and quick reference guides and stuff like that available, it's not that the quantity of that has necessarily reduced. It's that with these big systems and with web technology and all the technology that's out there, I haven't seen it taken advantage of as much as it could be. I think that the online performance support capability that exists is just not really being taken advantage of. And number 3, the third one, is back in the old days when I was a classroom-based end-user systems trainer. And we had a training system that we built. And I had to go fill it with data. I had to build exercises. And some of that happens today. I was a training professional, and I knew how to run a classroom. And I also knew the importance of a level 2 evaluation. What I have seen frequently, and this is another issue I have with the train-the-trainer approach, is even if a decent classroom training event is built, the folks who are trained to be the trainers are these quote-unquote super users or subject matter experts, and I don't see a significant effort made to turn them into effective classroom facilitators. What they're trained to do is they're trained to lecture through the transaction, to demonstrate it, and to let the users practice it. But almost no time is spent on developing their classroom facilitation skills. So years ago, I spent a lot of time developing what I thought was a level 1 training evaluation that needed no improvement ever for the rest of time. And it's a 2-part level 1 evaluation. One part is on the course itself, the other part's on the instructor. And for years, whenever I have had to train trainers, I've carved off a whole day for train-the-trainer classroom facilitation skills. And I start that class by giving them the instructor portion of the level 1 evaluation that I built. And I tell them, this evaluation will be completed by everyone who attends every delivery that you give, and they're going to score you. And I'm going to get those scores. And I'm going to average them. And I'm going to put them in a report next to your name. I'm going to sort that by high score to low score. And for the rest of today, I'm going to help you to not be a loser. I'm going to help you to be a winner. And we spend the day focusing on that level 1 evaluation. Every item in that level 1 evaluation and how to get a good score. And I found that to be somewhat motivational. So in an organization not too long ago, I wasn't involved in the training, but I was talking to one of the train-the-trainer people who was going to be trained to deliver training. And I said, how are you going to be evaluated in the classroom? And he said, I don't know. And it just started from there. Just another example of the whole art and science of being a professional facilitator. It continues to not be well respected on the planet, based on my experience. So, is that okay, Tracy?
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Walter, you're out there, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and I think you win the award for most questions.
All right.
But to maintain parity here, and we can come back and cycle through this, that's not an issue for me.
Okay.
Which of your questions that I've not reflected on do you want to hit me with right now?
So I would like to hear a little more about post-go-live support, you know, what we refer to as sustainment strategies. This is something that I've had limited experience to, you know, as you know, a professional working on projects. You know, we get off, or we wrap up our work at go live, so there's not much time for us to observe performance and to provide additional support. So I was wondering if you could share some of your insights into, you know, this topic.
Okay, let me break that into two parts. Typically, with a large project, for 30, 60, maybe 90 days, there'll be a period that's commonly referred to as stabilization. So the new system goes live. And of course, the system has some bugs and the users have some problems. And a help desk gets put in place where everybody who was on the project is either on the phone or close to the phone. So that whenever anything appears to go wrong, whoever's got a problem calls a number, or there's a series of numbers, they log the problem, they work on it, they fix it, they do whatever they got to do, it gets resolved, and at some point the volume of complaints and issues and problems drops off, and that support is abandoned, and the organization now has achieved steady state. So that's the first part of it. Now, as a person who works in an organization that has a training function that's client-facing, there's once the stabilization is over, there's from that point until the end of time is the second part. And this I don't see very often, and I don't know why, but in the last couple of client environments I was in, I was able to talk the client into doing it, and then the client talked my organization into doing it, because for some reason I had a difficult sell inside my own company. So frequently, when you're putting in SAP in a large company, just the training portion of that, to build the training to get to go live, just to go live, can be an expense of hundreds of thousands of dollars to build that courseware. And very frequently, then you go live, and then the courseware sits idle, and the system continues to be repaired and enhanced. The courseware becomes stale and no longer accurate, and that giant expense becomes a waste. So in the last couple of projects I've had, I've convinced the client that it would be a great idea to take that investment and to maintain its value by having someone from my organization, either on a full-time or a part-time basis, depending on what the need is, maintain the training material as the system continues to evolve, so that it's always up to date and complete and accurate. So I can't imagine why anyone would not want to do that. After spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a training library that can be put in place in lieu of your help desk going nuts, just maintain the training material. It's not a big expense to maintain it going forward, because the only time you change anything is when the system changes. And when the system changes, they have to rework it in a test environment and test it, and in a quality assurance environment, and then they put the change in production. So the person who's maintaining the training content does that work in the test environment as the new functionality is being tested. And they use that to pull any screenshots or whatever else they do. So I've seen that work very nicely, and I just don't know why organizations that have training departments don't fight for that business, because it's a great way to maintain a steady stream of work into your capacity, because it's a staffing nightmare if all you're doing is, I need 20 trainers because we're putting in an SAP application. And then you get past go live, and now you don't need those 20 trainers anymore. So they sit on the bench, or you fire them until the next project rolls along. So that staffing is up and down and up and down. But if you're continually maintaining the training content and library for a batch of clients, that's steady work to keep everybody busy. And then when the next project rolls around, you can have folks lay off the maintenance work and go work on the project. So, is that what you were looking for, Walter?
Yes, and I have to say this coincides with my observations as well. So I have, almost 16 years of ERP training experience, implementations, and this is a common theme, unfortunately. Lack of ownership is number one, and oftentimes it's also a lack of resources. So we develop training solutions, everything's fine. Pre-go live, we deliver our training, and then we walk away, and those materials become obsolete the week after we roll off. Nobody is, updating or maintaining them. So that's wasted money right there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ada, you are here, correct? Is it Ada or Ada? I see a line through the microphone there.
Mick, this is Greg. There was one person that had to leave early, and I can't remember who that was. So.
Okay. Up. She's turned the microphone on. He has. No. Hello, Ada. Are you there? I cannot hear you. But let me answer your best question, okay? Your question was, what is a must-read within our industry? And I'll give you a couple of books here. All right, I mentioned Robert Magyar earlier.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Ah, hi.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Okay.
All
okay,
right,
I'll take your answer to the best reads, to the must reads.
Okay. So I mentioned Robert Magyar earlier, and he wrote, besides that one book, he wrote a series of 6 books. And you can buy them in a box set. They're all paperbacks, and they're all easy reads. But I cut my teeth on those books. And that's where you will learn how to write a proper learning objective. And there's some other good basic information on there. The other one, I may get the title wrong here, but Kirkpatrick wrote the definitive book on the 4 levels of evaluation, and Cotter wrote the definitive book on change. And everything I really know about organizational change management at a conceptual level falls out of that Cotter book, including the one thing that organizations almost always refuse to do. But Cotter said you have to do it, and you have to. And in one of his, I think he's got like 8 principles or something like that, it's when the organization has decided it needs to be different in order to survive, some people are going to fight that change. And what Cotter says is, early on, you identify one of the people who's publicly fighting the change in front of everybody, you fire them. And you say, the reason I'm firing you is because the organization has decided to change. You have decided it was a bad idea. That will not be accepted. You're out of here. And that sends a powerful message that the organization is serious about what it's doing. I've seen many organizations where people are allowed to complain and complain and complain and complain, and nobody ever tells them to shut up. So as long as people are allowed to complain and there's no punishment for that, then clearly this can't be a serious effort. So those are my recommendations.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm just curious. I know it's just one per person, but I can hear from speaking to you, a straight shooter. Just curious, what has been one of your most challenging clients?
All of them. Every single one of them in one way, shape, or form suck, and I hate them.
Okay. Okay.
The challenge is that, and this is part of our profession, okay? I cannot tell you that I am a lawyer. I cannot tell you that I am a dentist. I cannot tell you that I am a pilot. And that's because I'm not licensed. Now, any idiot can walk into work tomorrow, stand at the front of a room, and talk at people and accomplish nothing, and go home at night to their partner and say, hey, honey, guess what I did today? I was a trainer. So any idiot can claim to be a trainer, and that's a problem. Because some of us actually take this profession seriously. We have learned the craft. We have learned the language. We have learned the skills. And we have studied the work of the masters who built the profession. I've done this for a long time. And in spite of my MBA, in spite of my mathematics degree, all the training and organizational design and org management stuff, I got all of that from reading Magill and Thirdparty and all the rest of them. And I got half a bookshelf full of all of those books that I read with a highlighter and a pen. And I crafted my own approach, and I practiced it, and I observed my performance, and I've improved it over time. So now I sit down with some idiot, and they're going to argue with me. They wouldn't argue with their mechanic. They wouldn't argue with their dentist. They wouldn't argue with their accountant. They wouldn't argue with a pilot. And they wouldn't argue with their lawyer. But they're going to argue with me. And that's annoying. And everybody thinks they have a right to an opinion. And I know it's a free country, but unless you're qualified, no, you don't have a right to an opinion. You have the right to shut up and listen to what I tell you. Because I'm an expert. And that's why you hired me. So just do what I tell you. Now, that's not how I taught the clients. That's how I taught the people in Greg's class, because we're trying to have fun. So, but that's the argument you have. And that's what's frustrating, and I get it every single time. And I just learned to find my value as a human being, not completely from my work anymore. And that's how I live with it. Because that's how it is, and I got to pay the rent. So,
okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hey, Greg, this one didn't turn out to suck so bad as I thought, did it?
You're doing great, Mick. I love how you don't pull any punches.
Yep. I bet you didn't get that from any of your other lecturers this year.
I can honestly say you are correct.
All right. Okay. Next on my list, we have, is it Sharia?
I think she is not
She
here.
does not appear to be on. All right. Hey, Walter, let me put you on the spot. So what did you learn today? Does it sound like
I learned.
I learned something.
I learned that honesty, can be brutal, but it's also a very useful thing. So, that's much appreciated. So thank you for sharing all your insights.
You're welcome. Look, here's my deal right now. I'm working for a client, and we went live with the system 2.5 years ago. And normally, as an organizational change person, I'd stick around for 60 days, and then we would all go away. So I've been here now 2.5 years post-go live. And the reason I'm here, and nobody else from my company is here. Everyone else is long gone. I'm the only one left. The reason I'm here is because in a less direct way than I have been tonight, I've been very honest with the client. I give and I take. And we have good conversations about a lot of things. And I've got over 20 years of experience in the general realm of human performance. So because I'm honest with this person and we have good conversations and she respects what I have to say, and when she wants to do it her way, even if I disagree with it, I'll say, okay, I don't know if I do it that way, but I will try my best to make it work that way. That's why I'm still here. So, which is great, because nothing I like better than not having anyone else from my organization around that I have to argue with. So it's just me. All right, I don't see Sharia online, so Allison, you're here, correct?
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I also have a degree in math as my undergraduate degree, so that's kind of cool.
Awesome. Let me tell you that I did, and this is it's frightening how the simplest things can be so impressive. Okay. So here's my third grade mathematics story for you. I'm on this project, and I'm not part of training. They're over there. I'm over here. What I was working on was actually the data security piece in defining the data security roles and who was going to have access to what transactions in that thing. And after we had a first cut of that, I made a little spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet was just 2 columns. The first column was the name of the transaction. The second column was how many people get that transaction. I took that spreadsheet and I sorted it in descending order. There were transactions that all 35,000 employees were going to have, and there were transactions that as little as 2 people were going to have. I took that printout and I walked it over to the training people, and I said, here, I just made this. It might be of interest to you. And right away, one of the guys looks at it. He looks all the way at the bottom, and he sees a transaction that's assigned to 2 people. And out loud he says, why are we building an ILT course for a transaction that's being assigned to 2 people? So, not my math, not my undergraduate degree, but that's where third grade math really helped me out and made me look like a superstar. Sometimes just counting things and putting them in ascending or descending order can provide wisdom that's beyond everyone else on the project. I don't know why, but it just does. So which of your questions do you want to put in the spotlight, Allison?
I was also going to ask you about ongoing performance support, but Walter did that. So.
And that's the one I made notes on. I underlined it. I underlined it, and I wrote yes with 3 exclamation points.
Can you touch a little on some non-training strategies, maybe, that you incorporate into solutions when this kind of stuff is happening?
Non-training solutions. Non-training solutions aimed at ensuring that a new system is going to go live successfully?
Yes.
Well, let me ask Greg to page back up to the first page of tonight's presentation. Do you consider anything on that screen to be a non-training solution?
Not really. I mean, I guess job aids and quick reference guides, kind of, but I was thinking more along the lines of communications, change management, maybe those kind of things.
Oh, yeah. Typically, there are 3 dimensions to organizational change management. Training is one of them. Communications is number 2. And by communications, what is meant there is a combination of defined audience, message, media, schedule, and author. And that's a communications plan. So, yeah, is that not training? You could technically argue either way. It's just information, and that is an important aspect. It's just letting the organization know what's happening, creating awareness, and hopefully anticipation, some degree of buy-in. You can use through communications creating the what's in it for me for each of your audiences so that they want to go to training, either for positive or negative reasons. They want to go to training because they want to be proficient in their job, because they're good human beings, and knowledge is fun and interesting and also valuable. And their lives are going to be better because the system is going to improve certain parts of their job for them. The negative is if you don't go to training, you're going to get fired, or you're going to be recognized as stupid. And you can't use that language, but you just have to infer it. The third part is a little odd, meaning that it's not so rigorously defined, and frequently that's referred to as change impact. And change impacts are an analysis of how a person's job is going to change completely outside of skill or knowledge requirement. And frequently those types of things are remediated through it's like a hybrid of a communication and a training, where it's more of information session. And people are brought in a room, and this particular change is discussed, and do it this way, and now you're going to do it that way, and here's some things you need to know, and there's a couple parts here, and you're going to get training in this and this and this, but here's more of a big picture of how that can be different. So that's what change impacts or change sessions about. So somebody, and let me look, Larry's question number 5 talks about careers and such. And my answer to that is I used to look all the time. I don't look anymore. I just got tired of not finding it. I don't know if anybody ever put the job out there on the internet for a human performance technology. People barely put jobs out there for trainers anymore. Sometimes they say trainer, what they really mean is e-learning developer. But the larger stuff that we're talking about, and where, and specifically for this big system stuff, that work belongs to consulting companies and the title for that is Organizational Change Management. That's where a lot of the action is today, is underneath these big system projects, doing change management, and those three different areas that I just mentioned. So career-wise, if you're out there looking at the various job boards and websites, organizational change management is a title that you want to create a search agent for. So, all right. Allison, are we square?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, cool. Let me see. Beverly, are you ready? I see you're out there. All right, I'm going to skip Beverly, and I'm going to see if Patrick can unmute himself and come out from behind the bushes.
Can you hear me?
Hello?
I hear both of you. Let me start. Beverly, are you there?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Hi. That's okay. Which of your questions do you want to go out now?
I think you covered a lot of the stuff I asked about.
Okay. Let me pick one, if I might. I'm going to pick number 5.
Okay.
And you use a checklist of things that you need to be done to prepare clients for go live. I don't use a checklist. I use 2 things. First and foremost is in this big formal systems world, we typically have to build out a project plan. And the project plan follows the basic ADDIE structure of analysis, design, develop, implement, and frequently not evaluate because nobody cares about that and doesn't want to pay for it. The second thing I use is not really documented, but I use my experience to manage the client and to try to get their head where it needs to be, regardless of what the salespeople wrote in the proposal and the statement of work. So I kind of went into that earlier, where if I've not been involved in the pursuit of this project, then frequently a non-training professional wrote the language in the contract, and the first thing I try to do is repair the damage that's been done up to that date and get the client's head on straight about what we should do, what's in their best interest, and help me out. And I ask them to help me out. And I understand that's what's written in the contract. Without costing you any more, I'm going to get you a better product. Just help me out here, work with me, and I'll get you with it. And that takes a while because that's an emotional thing to get a client to back off the contract language. So they have to trust it first. And that's a lot of work. But it's just paying attention and letting them know that you're there for them to be successful. So, is that cool? I will assume so. Patrick, are you there?
Taylor or Malone?
Patrick Taylor.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and skip my questions, and I just want to. You're very outspoken and direct and brash, and I like it.
That's because I can't get fired here.
But you've spoken about how you communicate with your clients and everything, and it's direct, it's honest. Have you always been that way, or is this a cumulative thing over the years? You just got tired of tiptoeing around the issue, or was there one big event that just made you change the way you handled your clients?
No, I've always been honest, and I've always been direct, and that's why I'm not a senior vice president. I have learned over the years to tone it down and to be a little less offensive is the right way to say it, and a little more patient, and to guide people to a right decision, as opposed to walking into a room and telling them what the right decision was and engaging in an argument. That hurt me. I could say it hurt me professionally over the years, which is why I say that's why I never became, and I never will become a senior vice president, because I'm not that person. I'm not that political. But there is a fair handful of people on the planet that are happy to give referrals for me if I need them, which I haven't in a while. If you do look at my LinkedIn profile, you will see the testimonials that I have out there, and I'm proud of each and every one of them. I didn't write any of them. They all just came from people who wrote them. So, the other thing is, I was born and raised in northern New Jersey, and that's a part of the country where if I'm not arguing with you, it's because I don't care about you. So I did learn early on that there are parts of the country that are not like northern New Jersey, and people are just polite to everybody all the time. And that's kind of annoying, but I've learned to live with it. So, but when I walk into a client environment now, I'm quieter than I used to be. I still get my point across, but it's just not as direct and abrasive as I have been this evening. Greg's nice enough to give me this opportunity every year to take my mask off and to just have fun with you guys, and that's a blast. But this is not what I sound like when I'm inside clients all day. Still making the same points. I'm just making them in a more politically approachable way. So, does that work for you?
Yes, that works for me. I'm from the South, so we're just, overly passive-aggressive on everything. So I admire the directness. It's not a skill that I have yet.
Here, I know in Southern speak how to call you an idiot without being offensive. You ready?
Go for it.
Well, bless your heart.
Oh, I could just eat you up.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, over a fire. All right, cool. All right, it's getting late already. Is Larry available?
I'm right here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, Larry. I just answered your number 5 I just answered your number 5, which is organizational change management. What else you got for me tonight?
You're looking at all these big organizations. I'm looking at my question 4 with all like the different sections within an organization. How do you not step on someone else's toes? You fix one and you hurt somebody else. How do you work through all that?
Well, I mean, the basic premise for tonight's conversation was on a big system implementation. So there's a giant thing that's occurring simultaneously.
Got it.
Affecting either most of an organization or a giant part of it or even all of it.
Okay.
Okay? Now, in a different world, if I were doing just a performance improvement project inside an organization that was targeted, there are opportunities where an improvement over here messes up somebody over there. And so the approach I would take would be more of a TQM, a total quality management approach, where before you start messing with a process, you have to get a sense of that process is part of a larger process. It has the beginning and an end. You have to understand the full scope. And in a correct world, in a TQM world, you go to the end of the process, the last piece, and you understand their output requirements. And then you ask them the stuff that you receive from the next group upstream. What are your requirements? And so your input requirements become the output requirements from the upstream group. And you move that all the way back to the beginning of the cycle. And yes, it may make things a little bit different for somebody, but here's the whole point. Nobody is getting paid to do a job so that their life is optimized. People are in there to do a job because their part of the process needs to serve the larger process that produces the best product for the target market such that it's competitive in the marketplace. And when it comes right down to it, it then becomes a leadership issue to talk to somebody who's complaining and says, look, I'm sorry if you have to work hard, but that's what we do here. And, you know, if you don't like that, run for Congress, because they don't do anything. There, I got my politics in, but it was party neutral.
It was party neutral.
All right, okay?
Thank you for sharing that with me. It sounds sort of like my time in the Air Force where the mission comes first.
The mission does come first. And I know you're tired, but that's too bad. Have another cup of coffee and saddle up.
There we go. Thank you for sharing with us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, last on my list is Layla. Are you here? See you.
I am here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
You get, yes, I do, and you get the last official question.
Okay, no pressure. So I'd actually like to skip over the questions I posted and ask you a question about ask you a question about John Cotter, who you mentioned earlier. I am creating a leading change course at the moment, and while almost all of the content I can find around leading change is from John Cotter, someone in my organization told me that we have to kind of scale back on using him because our organization frowns at his proposal to make an example of people who don't adopt change. I don't know if you've heard him say that before. He kind of proposes that you maybe fire the first person that goes against a change and share that with everyone. I'm curious what you think.
And I said that earlier because guess what? Cotter wrote the book, and the book is right. So I appreciate that they don't like that. So they don't want to do that, right?
Right.
Okay. Let me give you another thing you can look up. I just typed it in the thing, AdCar.
Yes, I am actually using that instead. Thank you.
Oh, there you go. So I have validated you.
You have. Thank you very much.
Just understand, and you'll need to come up with the language for this, okay?
Okay.
Let's see. What was the name of the movie? I think it was Timothy Hutton played Mozart.
Amadeus?
Say that again, please.
Amadeus?
Amadeus, that's right. So Mozart wrote a piece of music, and he's playing it, and the king is there. And it's a fairly complex piece of music. And the king, who's an idiot, tells Mozart that it has too many notes. because it's too complex for the king's tiny brain to comprehend. So Mozart looks at the king and essentially says, which notes in particular would you have me remove? So, Layla, you're in the same situation where here's the person who's the definitive person. He's defined the field. He's done the research. He's created the rules. And your client doesn't like one of the rules.
That's exactly right.
Yes, which means they're wrong and they're idiots. So, so if you can find, and again, don't ruin your career on this, okay?
Got it.
Don't take it personally. There are lots of idiots everywhere, and I'm sure at times I'm an idiot too. So, you know, that's why I'm by myself in a hotel room. But just do the best you can, and if you can come up with the right analogy, then there you go. So
thank you.
Best of luck to you.
Thanks.
Okay. Now, I also see on the list a Patrick Malone, from whom I did not receive questions, but I'm a fair guy. Patrick, do you have anything you want to throw at me tonight?
I already threw a couple at you early on. I didn't know what to approach you with, so I kind of waited until you spoke to hear about it.
Okay. Have I lived up to every expectation you had this evening, Patrick?
Well, it's towards the end. I'd be interested to kind of hear your if you feel comfortable, just kind of differentiating between the training and education component. But if you feel that would take too long, I understand if you don't want to let that go.
I can do that in 30 seconds or less.
All right.
The difference between training and education is training produces skill, education produces knowledge. Knowledge can be tested via written exam. Skill cannot unless it's the skill of writing. Does that work for you?
Fair enough.
Okay. Now, frequently education, meaning knowledge, is an underlying component that's necessary in order to execute a skill. But most people who have jobs are paid to execute skills, not to possess knowledge.
Okay. When you initially made that comment, I was kind of leaning towards the disagreement because I see more of a blend between the two, that one can lead to the other. But I understand your distinction between them.
Okay. So we're still friends?
Of course.
Excellent. Okay. Hey, Greg, look at that. I almost burned the whole time slot.
You done good, Mick.
Yeah, well, you know, it just takes me a little bit to get started.
I guess there's not a whole lot else going on down there in Roanoke.
Everything that goes on in Roanoke, I've already done it twice. So all three things there are to do here.
By the way, everyone, Mick is from Exit 11 in Jersey, in case you were wondering.
11? I'm not from 11, dude. I'm a 16W guy.
I knew that would.
153.
I knew that would get a rise out of you.
Yeah, don't mess my exit up, God.
Greg, I'm 11.
Actually, Mick is more like 12, but that's okay. That's beside the point.
Yeah, right. So, all right. I have nothing else for you people. I've given you everything I have. I'm exhausted.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. One last comment or question for Mick. I thought it was very good, and Mick always brings his own personality and refreshing honesty, shall we say.
Yeah, thanks. That was very nice.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say goodnight and want to thank Mick once again for a very provocative session. I always learn a lot.
It was revealing. It was revealing.
Well, you know, if it's possible to learn and have fun, and I think I'm not sure that was Mick's goal, but it worked for me.
You mean having fun?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
That was a positive side effect.
Mick, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I know there's lots to do in Roanoke, so I appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm just getting started with my night.
Well, yeah, you could be watching some rerun on cable TV, I'm sure, if you weren't doing this tonight.
Exactly. That's right. I'm watching the sunset.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. I'll talk to everybody. Well, probably never, but that's okay. I'll see you around. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, folks. All right, folks, this is our last class.